In my usual style, I started going through the portions because it's Saria Metzora and or Tazria-Metzora. And it's I one thing I read led to another thing, led to another thing, led to another thing. And so in my very disjointed, jumbled way, I'm going to throw out some themes and invite you to join in exploring them with me. So there's a lot of themes too. So as just a quick synopsis, Tazria is about, well, it's about having skin disease. It's also about when one the laws concerning menstruation and also emissions from women and men. So before I even get there, I'm going to start with a little story. So this past weekend, I had the pleasure of going to a concert, and it's like I was in a fairly large setting with lots of people around, and as you all know, things are starting to bloom, and I know I'm sneezing a bit when I get a whiff of the blossoms that are happening outside my door, and somebody down the row sneezed, and most people were not wearing masks, and somebody near me looked at that person like they were about to explode. How dare you sneeze in public? And I thought, my goodness, we're shaming people for having allergies or for some sort of a bodily response to the world. And who's to know, maybe that person was filled with COVID and now shared it with everybody. But this idea of shaming, body shaming about all kinds of different things, especially illness, is something that has now become more accepted in our society. And as someone who works with people who are ill, it saddens me. My daughter is an activist in the world of body shaming and fat shaming, and she's extremely sensitive to, as all young women can be, to things that are upsetting to her, and that's one of it. And when I started reading this or rereading it, it just came to me in that way. So I call it not disease, but dis-ease. We are at dis-ease with anything that is, a little gross or a little, I mean, definitely I have my own dis-eases about things, and it's I don't think there's a way out of that. I just want to bring it to your attention. So anyways, one of the themes is the human body. And according to our reading, the human body can be pure, ritually pure, or ritually impure. But also that also applies to clothing and buildings and other inanimate, non-sentient things. That also one of the things, especially in the Parshat Metzora, is that words can trigger consequences. The Metzora is supposedly that word comes from Motzi Shem Ra, which means to bring forth a bad name. And we use the words Lashon Hara to say basically the same thing, an evil tongue. And one of the commentators, and I can't tell you who at this point because I read so many different ones, talked about Lashon, the word Lashon, the tongue can either, the first letter is a lamed and it points upward, and that can kind of instill in us a sense of uplifting. Our words can uplift. And the end of that Hebrew word is nun, which goes below the line of letters, and that the words can also bring people down. So that's one little way of looking at it. There's a few other, so please bear with me, and then I'm going to open it up and I will shut up and just listen to you. So the idea of there's an idea of blood and kashrut. Now where's my little, so this I read that, well, actually I'm not going to go that way right now, but the idea of sorry, I'm jumbling over my words. I have so much to say. So Rabbi Jonathan wrote in his Turn It, is that blood flowing is a sign of life. And we are looking at the flow of blood as being something that is making us ritually impure if we are menstruating. And that is, to me, somewhat of a disconnect. But I also read that the word tameh, which means impure, can also be translated as susceptible, which meaning physically or spiritually susceptible, and one is in need of protection. We'll get back to that in a minute. And then there's this idea of purity through water, mikveh, and purity through blood, through sacrificial offerings. And it's curious to note that childbirth, when one has a child, the mother brings forth a sin offering. And I found that to be also peculiar, because what is the sin? One of the first commandments is to be fruitful and multiply. Why are we not making this a joy offering? Why is this a sin offering? So that's another thing. Now, the other part of this is that as I'm reading through, and especially in a lot of the more progressive commentary, there's this need, well, it's not even just progressive, it's actually traditional as well. There's this need to make the whole thing feel better, that women have so much power, and this is just a show of their power, and to kind of like uplift women in this curious way, because they are considered impure after having a child or menstruating. And I also find that to be a little offensive. I've started, I don't know, maybe it's my old age of 60, that I don't want the apologetics. I don't want someone to try to make me feel better about the text. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I think it is a go-to. I think for many of us who have studied Torah, it's a go-to to try to equalize things and to make it less difficult to read some things. But I really personally have started becoming really offended by it, because I don't want someone to make me feel better. I want to know what it says, and I want people's commentary, but I don't know. And this is what I think is sort of the meta. Well, there's a couple meta things. One is the action causes consequences, which requires a belief in God managing individuals in the world. The idea that if we say something that is harmful, it can cause pain, and that's it's one thing, but to have it come back onto the person who caused it in a way that makes them need to be isolated and to have scaly skin or whatever is, to me, very disconcerting, because I don't necessarily believe in that kind of a being that I think that our actions do cause consequences. We don't take care of the earth is going to turn on us, and we see that happening every day. We don't establish good relationships with our children or with other people, then we're going to be lonely or you know, without others to share in the joys and the sadnesses of life. But for a physical manifestation of that by skin disease, and I'm not going to call it leprosy because it's not leprosy, more like psoriasis or probably many other different things, is, to me, I don't know, it just is upsetting to me. The other meta is the personal autonomy versus the role of priests, because, and I'm going to now get there. So basically, priests are given the complete power and authority to decide who is experiencing the kind of they come in, the priests were told to go and examine, or we were told that they must come and examine a person's body, and that person would then be isolated by being exiled from the community or some sort of quarantine. And the question rose in my head, like, who trained these priests to diagnose things? Like, where did that come from? Where are the healers? Where are the people that, and assuming that many healers were women, where are those people with the remedies, the folk remedies, to help somebody who's in excruciating pain because they have a rash on their arm or something? Like, where is that in the text? Instead, we read about the priests having all this power, and then and maybe this is because we live in the world we live in today. I'm like, well, how many of these things were politically motivated? Well, this guy's saying something bad against me, so I'm going to say he's Tom May, so he's going to be thrown out of the community for a couple of weeks and can't vote, or that kind of thing. I mean, like, what was this the prelude to what is one of the main things wrong in our democracy, of people having all this power that they can change the way we choose to want to live. And also, like, it also opens the door for monetary gain. I mean, we hear later, especially in the stories of pre-Christianity, of the teacher Jesus going and saying, the temple's corrupt and things like that. But the idea that, I don't know that, I don't think priests were born with with some sort of goodness instilled in them. They were human beings. And so if Stern has this big vineyard and has lots of money, and his daughter gets a skin disease, did he pay under the table so that she wouldn't be exiled? I mean, whereas the person who is begging on the street has a skin disease, and there's no way to negotiate whether or not they are being thrown out of the community. So, and I know that it is also a and this is one of the things that was discussed in one of the things I read, is that it is the decision to isolate or exile people was ephemeral. It meaning that it was temporary. It wasn't forever. Although we do know that in other times there were colonies of people who had a terrible disease, where they lived there forever until they died. Anyway, sorry, I'm like, I really got I kind of fell into this quagmire of all this stuff, and the idea of somebody having that kind of autonomy to do that. Now, there, I also asked, well, what about our mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, and how do we negotiate that with the idea of being with people who are contagious? And that's something that I've, over the last few years, had to wrangle with in my work, because there's all kinds of guidelines that I've followed due to where I work, but the idea that what do we do when we can't perform that mitzvah because we're trying to be safe and to not bring a disease to the community that could cause, dare I say it, a pandemic. But it also led me to start, I jumped in headfirst into, well, what about exorcism? And there is a whole tradition of Jewish exorcism. And I was thinking about, because this idea of homes and dwellings being, having that kind of diagnosis of being impure, the idea that many of us have used sage to get rid of the bad, mojo in our houses or something. So I don't know. I just sort of fell into this, and it all also makes me question how much, and I wasn't able to really establish the connection strongly, so I won't even bring some of the stuff I read, but how much of this also comes from a pagan tradition, this idea of isolation and exile and being impure and ritual purity. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you. So jump in. Go ahead, Abigail, please.
The blood, okay, so blood is life. And after you give birth, that blood is no longer circulating in your body. It's dead. It's useless. When you menstruate, again, it's blood that doesn't bring life. It doesn't support life anymore. So it's of little use. I mean, it actually has a lot of nutrients, and you can give it to your plants, and you can, I put, Tom put the placenta in the ground, and I think he grew something on it. However, it doesn't support a human life.
Sure.
So it's not pure. It's not, it doesn't support a life that can then praise God.
So then we can get rid of, so we're getting rid of it, which is a good thing, right?
But the thing is you've touched death. So you can't, you're not ritually pure anymore.
That's interesting. Also, that's something just triggered a thought I had earlier, that you're right. The idea, you're ritually impure if you've touched something that has died, or touched somebody who is dead. And you're also ritually impure if you have sexual relations, or you've or had a discharged, not necessarily blood. So men who have, who masturbate, or who have some sort of emission, at night, then they're ritually impure too. And that's something we don't dwell on, but that, I think, I mean, I know it's in other places in the Torah, but I think that's something that should be that should have been gained equal footing in this Torah portion, so that it's not just about women.
I have a question. Does anybody know what women did with menstrual blood in ancient times, or how menstrual blood was managed? It's not
Hmm.
Torah. Does the Torah address it?
I,
I bet there's something in the Talmud.
yeah,
Probably
They
is in
don't-
the Talmud, yeah, but not in the Torah. I don't know. I've never seen a reference.
It's funny that it's so prominent, and yet being a female activity is probably given a lot less attention. I'm amazed that there hasn't been more conversation, but then I don't tune in always with the feminist literature and all that. I'm way deficient in that. So maybe there's something in those, Linda, that maybe Rachel Barenblatt or someone, prominent in um, be speaking feminist and female issues would have a take on that. It might be in her poetry, or Shefa Gold. I bet she's got something. But I was thinking, well, blood is holy, and therefore, I mean, we'd have to treat it with a certain kind of reverence. And when things die, we bury them. And I'm surprised actually, maybe too, that there wasn't some kind of ritual involved in burying, disposing of menstrual.
I would imagine they used rags under their
Oh, yeah.
clothing to catch it, and then they washed the rags because they couldn't keep getting rid of rags each month.
Right.
I would imagine they just washed it. That would be it. That's what Christians do.
Perhaps should have been a blessing or something,
Probably.
A lot of young women are
But-
using these cups,
yeah.
Mm.
and I think I've either heard my daughters talking or read somewhere that the belief is that the cups are very ancient, which
Okay.
would actually make more sense than
Rags.
rags in a way, because
yeah.
Who knows? We don't
I
know.
don't know.
I just looked up. So Egyptians used menstrual loincloths and throwaway tampons made by papyrus or similar grass. And there were also something I can't pronounce the name of this. There's some sort of moss that was used for absorbing menstrual blood.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay, that they buried then, maybe. Who knows?
Wait,
And-
moss?
In ancient Rome, women applied ligatures to the groin and to the arm pits, blocking off blood flow. Oh,
Ooh.
Anyway,
sorry. Go ahead.
I would just like to say that what you said about exorcism, this is much more, this is shamanistic. I don't want to call it pagan. This is ancient stuff that we're hearing the residues of here, and that the rabbis who were doing the Talmud did not particularly understand. They were a good hundreds and hundreds of years after this was originally coming from, if not thousands. And it is what they're talking about is a spiritual issue. So it's the priest, because the whole Vayikra is about God calling out to us, and how do we respond and how do we get close. And there's so much in Vayikra about boundaries and having to be protected. You can't just approach because you'll be annihilated. Okay. So there are situations and states in which, particularly if you're sort of leaking essence, you're not safe. I mean, that's at least one way to think about it. And, it's the priests do the diagnosis because they're the ones who are acquainted with spiritual issues. Presumably they can spot when it's a spiritual problem rather than a physical problem. And so they're the ones making the differentiation. And then there's ways to wait it out for the person or do whatever, who knows, but rituals. So that I think the translation in terms of safety, whatever you used a word, I can't remember what it was, but susceptible. Is I think much closer to what we're talking about here. And, Jews have been trying to turn all this into rational stuff since at least the Hellenistic era. Okay. Maimonides tried. but it's not fundamentally about rational. It's a different realm that we're talking about, so that's all I wanted to say.
I have maybe one more insight about that too, because when you think about blood being holy, this could be the post-rabbinical attitudes could be a sort of a backlash from the feminine goddess times. If you think about it, in primal times when God was female, they must have celebrated women and their menstruation and all those fertility rites had to have honored blood in some way, and probably not with the same kind of casting aspersions when one failed to be fertile, but probably just some other kind of ritual. I'm all of a sudden imagining that there must have been a whole series of things that we don't know about, or maybe there are sources on that do know. I'm just thinking that the feminine god probably celebrated the menstrual cycle, and I'm thinking that the rabbinical drift on this was the pendulum swing toward the masculinized law and the masculinized source of law and authority. What say you?
Yeah. So that's actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of my rabbit holes that I fell into was learning that the goddess that represented menstruation was Artemis, but she's also the goddess of transition. And that was the last big meta theme that I came up with, this idea of, and I have to apologize because I kind of mixed up both the two different portions, because they are very separate and they're very different. And one dealing with menstruation and one dealing with the whole skin and other things kind of get all mixed up together. But it is all about transition, whether it's ridding our bodies of the dead blood, or we're moving from one state to another. And we move from pure to impure to pure again, which takes many steps to get to that purity again. We through our lives we go through many transitions. We were just talking about Rachel dying, and the idea of going from life to death to and the whole death within Judaism, a mourning period, more about mourning. In Judaism, there's transitions you go through, and just in everything. And the many of you have worked in counseling, and that people are most vulnerable when they're in the midst of a transition, whether it's dealing with divorce or moving or death or losing a job. And so maybe the whole idea susceptible is a good word for a good translation of Tameh, because we are most susceptible to all kinds of things when we are in the midst of a transition. So, sorry to jump in again. Please go ahead, talk.
Ruth has her hand raised. Go ahead, Ruth.
So thanks, Karen. So early on, when you were talking, what came to my mind, I'm surprised nobody mentioned this, is that for many women of menstrual age, menstruating meant you weren't pregnant, and it would have been a very unhappy time. And so I can see where, right, rather than celebrating, which we might do now, to not be pregnant, but in a time of be fruitful and multiply, where children were really needed to grow up and be useful, that not, and it's also true in a different way now for frequently, that it meant you weren't pregnant. And that would be profound and meaningful in a heartbreaking way, or possibly in a shaming way, as you had mentioned at the beginning.
That's
I'm surprised that hasn't come up. Yeah.
a good point.